We have updates on Pope Francis's health conditions, and that sets the context for everything we're going to talk about, probably until his situation is resolved one way or the other. And the messages that we're getting from Rome are extremely mixed. They're sending almost competing signals right now, and so it's hard to discern what's the truth. And this has a direct relation to the story today, which is about Cardinal Cupich and another cardinal deciding they don't like some reporting that's gone on from very mainstream Catholic journalists. And so they canceled them and a fairly mainstream Catholic theologian. That's a little breathtaking in how over the top it is. It's almost as if they feel they can get away with almost anything right now. Let's start with the update on Pope Francis. So this is the update. Catholic News Agency has a live update website, so we'll actually refresh it together in case there's something else that's happened. But so they say their Pope shows slight improvement in the hospital. This was updated 2:05 Central Time. Well, Vatican City. I don't know if it's 2:05 Central, like where I'm at, or if that's 2:05 Rome time. But they say that Pope Francis was admitted to the hospital in Rome on Friday, the 14th, to undergo testing treatment for bronchitis. He has had breakfast in his armchair on his 7th day at Gemelli. He had a peaceful night. They suggest the brief bulletin from the Holy See press office suggests the Pope's gradual progress as he enters his 7th day of treatment. He has canceled a bunch of things in the coming days. If he is released and makes a recovery, which I still kind of think he's going to, then it's going to take, I expect, 2 to 3 weeks in the hospital. But they said yesterday in the afternoon that he showed slight improvement. Slight improvement. They said his blood tests showed fewer inflammatory markers as the Holy Father continues to fight off a case of double pneumonia. So that's actually, if you want him to have as much time to be on this, to have that interior conversion or get himself in that spiritual state to be on the side of the angels when that time comes, then that's a good thing. And I want that for everybody. I keep saying, you want your detractors in life to pray for your interior conversion. Even if necessarily you are the one who's right and they're wrong, you still want people to be praying to God for grace for you in your life. And that is the Catholic thing to do. Now, it's also noted that he was visited by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni earlier on Wednesday. The politician said the Pope was alert and responsive and that the two joked as always. And he continues to ask for your prayers. So that's the official story. And then we will go to a couple others who repeat the official story, but also some mixed messaging here. So first is Rich Rejo, who says that papal advisor Antonio Spadaro said of Francis yesterday, there is no sense of alarmism. He will need 2 to 3 weeks to recover. Francis lives his physical limits very calmly and doesn't give up on spending himself as he can. It's part of his character and spirituality. And what he means here is by spending himself as he can, it means that he's still working. He's just doing it within the full knowledge of his limitations right now. That all having been said, here's the mixed messaging before we go to our main story. This was shared by El Carbo online, sharing a story from the Daily Mail. I don't need to give you details about this, that the Pope says it enough. Apparently, the Swiss Guard are rehearsing Pope Francis's funeral. Now, this builds off of what I told you yesterday, that Rorate Caeli reported that Vatican media and the media in Rome are being prepared for an eventuality. What does that mean? They're prepared to go live with breaking news of the Pope's either imminent or actual passing, if such happens soon. Reportedly, a couple of American news outlets, Reuters and the AP, have live streams ready to go if that were to happen in the Vatican. So the Swiss Guard are rehearsing. Now, some would say that's pretty ghoulish. I think it's prudent. Unfortunately, I think it is prudent that they do so, that they be prepared for an eventuality. At some point, the Swiss Guard will be conducting their part of his funeral, so they should be prepared for it. That could be 5 years from now. That could be 2 weeks from now. We don't know. It's all in God's hands. So Pray as your conscience dictates to you, and always remember that there are those people out there who do think the worst about you, who are Catholic themselves, and pray as you would want those to for him, as you would want them to pray for you. Now let's go to our story today. A lot of people don't like that I'm, very diplomatic about all this, but it's just the way I think my conscience dictates that I do this. Cardinal Cupich canceled J.D. Flynn of the Pillar. The Pillar Catholic, I've taken a couple slight digs at. I respect immensely the work they do. I was actually really skeptical when Pillar Catholic first launched because the Pillar was started by former very mainstream Catholic news outlet writers and staffers and editors, and it seemed like it wasn't going to go well. But I was wrong, and I'm happy to eat crow on that. They're very moderate. They're not rad trads by any stretch. They tell the truth as best they can. I don't agree with all their takes. I sometimes have just kind of made fun of some of their takes, but they're not firebrands. They try to do the most honest reporting humanly possible, and for that I respect them, and I use them as a source usually without any problems. So they ran this story, and this gets into some weird stuff. Headline from Pillar Catholic: Pray for the Pope. Am I canceled? Published on the 18th, so 2 days ago. Now, this is part of their weekly update, so we got to go all the way down here. They buried the lead on this. And the context of this is a story that I almost ran with myself. Not because I was afraid. I didn't because I wasn't afraid of not doing it. It's just that for whatever reason now, 2 weeks after J.D. Vance made his statements about the Ordo Amoris and then going to the Munich Security Conference and telling the leaders of the European Union they're becoming tyrants and they're doing it out of fear and they should remember the words of Pope John Paul II of do not be afraid, and telling them not to give up on their own values and the rest of it. The response to that, combined with all the Catholic Charities, USAID news, and migration stuff, and the bishops now, as I reported yesterday, deciding to sue the Trump administration over this, all of that has dominated the news. But the Pillar reported that there had been an investigation into Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., and that his name was essentially cleared. I'm sure this will go into that a little bit. But after the fact of that, all of a sudden, Mr. Flynn and others around him started losing access to the Diocese of Chicago and in Washington, D.C. to some things. So here are the details. Quote, some readers in the Chicagoland area have reached out to me about 3 talks I was scheduled to give next week in proximity to the Windy City. Proximity meaning in the Diocese of Chicago. On Thursday, I was scheduled to give a talk about the work of Catholic journalists as part of a Catholic culture lecture series in Oak Brook, Illinois. On Friday, I was scheduled to talk with college students and faculty about living the Christian life amid the shifting cultural ground of the U.S. and division in the church. On Saturday, I was scheduled to speak with high school students about the dignity and gift of people with disabilities, disabled people. That's what that talk was going to be about. All 3 talks were organized by the Lumen Christi Institute, a unique intellectual apostolate whose work is mostly in proximity to the University of Chicago, but has a mission that resonates across the Chicago Archdiocese and indeed across the church. I respect the work of Lumen Christi Institute immensely. You should too. Yesterday, the Institute informed me that the talks were canceled. It was clear to me that it was not Lumen Christi's decision to cancel them. It apparently just turns out I am not welcome to speak in the Archdiocese of Chicago, even about the universal call to holiness, even about loving the church as a mother, and believing that Christ can heal all wounds and sin, which is what I plan to talk about on Thursday, even about knowing and loving people with disabilities. I reached out to the Archbishop's office of the Archdiocese of Chicago yesterday, that's Cardinal Cupich, to better understand the decision, but I have not yet heard back. Maybe it was just some kind of mix-up. And as an aside, I saw that this morning J.D. Flynn posted on X that he's still not heard back from them. But if there is some concern about my orthodoxy, I would like to hear it and correct it, but I doubt it's that. If there is some concern about the accuracy of our reporting, I'd be glad to hear that too. If there is some sense that I am not sufficiently loyal to the Holy Father or to the Church, I'd be glad to understand it. But I don't think it's that. I think the problem is that the Pillar takes seriously Pope Francis's 2018 admonition that Catholic journalists should do their work for the sake of reform in the Church. I think it's that I'm not a house cat. And I'm concerned if that makes me the wrong kind of people for the Archdiocese of Chicago. Even to go tell a bunch of high school kids how much I love the extraordinary children God has given me. In truth, I almost let this go and decided not to say anything until Ed found out this morning, another one of his editorial staff, I believe, that a talk he was scheduled to give tonight in the Archdiocese of Washington had been canceled just after we reported on the Vos Estis Lux Mundi investigation in that archdiocese. That's the investigation I was obliquely referring to, involving Cardinal Wilton Gregory, involving some accusations in his past about either the handling of evil priests, we'll say McCarrick type priests in his diocese, or things alleged that he himself had done. Either way, the investigation concluded by saying he was not in the wrong there. And then an interview we had scheduled with a high-ranking churchman was abruptly canceled too. In short, my talks got canceled this week, and so did Ed's. Here's my concern. We're not polemical or incendiary. We make it a point to avoid sensation. We're equal opportunity reporters. We cover everybody with the same rigor and seriousness. We're not culture warriors or showmen. We're not twirling our pencils in a whirlwind on conspiracy-laden YouTube videos. Hey now, I object to that. We consistently urge obedience to ecclesiastical authority, even as we urge better governance where it's needed. We try to be cool and normal, is what I'm trying to say. The problem, so far as I can tell, is that we do the reporting seriously. If we're persona non grata in segments of the church for doing our jobs, what does that say about the church's commitment to the values we're committed to? Transparency, accountability, good governance. That's the part concerning me right now. Getting canceled in Chicago or DC strikes me as both the best argument for the pillar's existence and the reason why sometimes it's no fun to be the pillar at all. And he promises to keep doing his job, which is good. Don't let them intimidate you, Mr. Flynn. Even if I don't agree with all your takes, please keep up the work you are doing. It is critically important. And I'm going to point out the obvious here. Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal Wilton Gregory were all directly in the orbit of one Mr. Ted McCarrick, the former Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. There are plenty of pictures out there floating around showing those two, along with Cardinal Dolan and a few others, all laughing it up together. They all were cut from the same cloth. Well, maybe not Dolan, but the rest were all part of the same team. And they were all real friendly with each other. And that's what this is about. This is the quashing of dissent. It's one of the more truly remarkable things that you see happening now is the open use of power to crush dissenting voices. They weren't the only ones. See, here is Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, and I put him on the thumbnail so that you could see what he had to say about all this. This is Dr. Kwasniewski posting this on his own Facebook. He says, J.D. Flynn joins a long list of those who have been canceled. Some readers in the Chicagoland area have reached out to me about the talks as scheduled. He goes over this, and this is what we're talking about here. It's to the point where, Dr. Kwasniewski has faced this stuff himself, right? He has been canceled himself for teaching what the church always taught on most things going back to before the council. Dr. Kwasniewski is a favorite among people who want to dunk on recognize and resist types. Sedevacantists love to go after him. And when I say Sedevacantists, I mean Sedevacantists, not Benedict is the real Pope types. I mean Sedevacantists who don't think Benedict was anything but a heretic himself. Because Dr. Kwasniewski gives intellectual weight to the recognize and resist position, and the Sedevacantists like to shred him for it because they say that his position is untenable. I would really love to know what Pius X would have said about Francis or even any of his predecessors, because Pius X and the anti-modernist popes from Leo XIII onward never really touched on the possibility of the See of Peter being used itself to push revolutionary change in the church, whether at slow speed like Francis's predecessors or at nitro speed like it is today. But Dr. Kwasniewski takes a lot of flack for that, even though he's one of the most measured, moderate voices in this, and he has had his talks canceled too. All of these people have. And this is why I don't go to conferences. The reason they're able to cancel these, the way this works, this is not widely known among Catholics for some reason, but the way this works is basically like this. If you're going to have a conference on the subject about the church in any way in a diocese, then you have to have the permission of the local ordinary to speak. Obviously, not every organization does this. Those affiliated with formally or just sort of informally in a sort of an allied sense with like the SSPX won't bother, because the SSPX are usually, the bishops usually make up a lot of weird things about the SSPX, claiming they're in schism when Rome has never said that. In fact, Rome has said the opposite of that. But a lot of bishops will push that lie anyway. So a lot of the bishops would never give their approval to anything related to that. And so those speakers who are associated with that just do so with the SSPX's permission, but they don't do it with the local ordinary's permission. But in general, if you want to go to a conference, host a conference, you have to get the local ordinary's permission. This is why the National Catholic Reporter was told you can't call yourself Catholic, because everything having to do with the name Catholic in a diocese has to be done with the bishop's permission. This is why I comment on things sometimes going on outside of the Catholic Church, either among Christianity more broadly or implications for people of faith in the political realm. Because anything you do has to be done if you are doing things that are speaking on behalf of the church or a church function with the permission of the ordinary. He is the king, basically, of the diocese. And so Mr. Flynn and the rest of them had to get permission to host conferences, have interviews, all the rest of it, and then usually it's just, oh yeah, no problem. But they chose to report on things involving Cardinal Wilton Gregory, because Cardinal Gregory, at the end of the day, does have kind of a, we'll say, a troubling past. And it should be looked into. We need to know who our shepherds are. We're in a time of revealing. You may have noticed that going on in the news a lot these days. People finding out a lot about evil things the institutions are doing involving our government. Not just Catholic institutions, the Lutheran services are doing it, secular nonprofits that all proclaim to be doing good deeds or doing not so good deeds with your tax dollars. People are finding out about this. And so in the spirit of trying to mend bridges, restore confidence, it's a really bad look for cardinals of the church to cancel Catholic journalists for doing their jobs, to stop them from talking to kids about the love of God, from talking to organizations about love for people with disabilities, something Jesus unequivocally would command us to do explicitly. He does in the scripture to help the infirm. And yet, the same cardinals who push a materialist message and their love for those with disabilities completely in line with their materialist message, doesn't conflict with it, they still cancel them to make a point. Dissent will not be tolerated in the new synodal church. Edu says, Cordileone is the only U.S. bishop who stands out to me as trying to be a good shepherd. I'm sure there are many more, but I can't think of them. There are others. Aside from Bishop Strickland, everybody will say, but there are others. Bishop Naumann came out on the right side of the migration controversy recently. But in general, yeah, Edu says he might be the next Strickland. That could be. This isn't going to be the last story you hear like this. For whatever reason now, the Cardinals feel empowered to crush dissent. Beware of that. Because again, everything I'm telling you is in the context of this, the Francis health story. Joining late, he has shown slight signs of improvement. Now that could change. But everything is going on in the context of both that and, of course, while they're saying that, the Swiss Guard are preparing for a funeral. The movement is afoot behind the scenes. If you want to know what's really going on this, start paying attention to see if your bishop announces he's traveling to Rome in the next couple of weeks. That'll tell you a lot. Now, the secular realm is a key to understanding what's going on in general. Because to end this, I actually have a good news story for you. You might be aware that in the UK, starting in the 19th century, and maybe a little before that, the British Crown started lightening up on Catholics. After a couple hundred years of suppressing Catholics publicly, persecuting in some of the most grotesque ways imaginable. After a couple hundred years of that, the English Crown started lightening up, allowing Catholics to worship and things like that, and eventually allowing Catholics to come out and worship and even hold positions in Parliament, although they passed laws to ensure that no Catholic could be king and hold certain positions in the English United Kingdom's system. But they could become members of Parliament. There are Catholics in the House of Lords, as far as I've heard. That might be changing for the better, actually. I don't know why, other than maybe somebody going and saying, "Well, it's the 21st century. Your fears of the Catholic Church forcing England back into being a Catholic country and undoing the Protestant revolt is a little unfounded." But they're changing that. They're starting to change those things. There has been talk, for example, of removing the prohibition for monarchs to be Catholic again. Because it's the 21st century, we're pretty far removed from the Anglican revolt. There's not exactly any threat of the Catholic Church forcing the population to become Catholic again. But also people are noticing in England, one of the fastest growing religions in the country is Catholicism. Don't know why that's happening in the UK. If you're in the UK watching this, let me know, why is it that Catholicism seems to be growing? Is it just the absolute state of the Anglican Church, that the Anglican Communion is a hot mess right now, to put in common parlance, and that's why people are becoming Catholic? I could see that as a reason. But due to the state of the Catholic Church itself, I add a mystery as to why this is happening. But all that is happening in that kind of context. And the secular media is reporting on this themselves. So we go to the BBC for a story that I again would have reported on for you a few days ago, but the news in the last week has been kind of crazy. So with the headline, "New law to lift ban on Catholics in Kirk Roll." This is coming out of Scotland. That's how you can tell from Kirk Roll. We're talking here about upper echelons of the Scottish government. This is a good news story, because it means Catholics are, that the freedom of the church is being respected for the church to do its work in the world. And that would include influencing secular government and running it in a way commensurate with our values. Even and yes, that does not mean imposing Catholicism on people, but you want people with their moral compass correct to have these positions. And I don't know anything about this particular person, but this is Lady Alicia Giolini, who will become the first practicing Catholic to hold the position of Lord High Commissioner of the Church of Scotland, if it should pass, the legislation should pass. She's a practicing Catholic holding a position adjacent to the Church of Scotland. I don't know how that works in terms of her soul, but a Catholic is being allowed to hold an incredibly influential position in government in Scotland. That's not a bad thing. It means that they're getting rid of their antiquated anti-Catholic laws in the United Kingdom more broadly. Here are the details. Quote, "A new bill lifting the ban on Catholics becoming the King's representative at the Church of Scotland's annual assembly has been introduced at the House of Commons. Lady Alicia Giolini, KC, has been given the post of Lord High Commissioner of the Church's 2025 General Assembly. However, the former Lord Advocate is a practicing Catholic and legally prohibited from holding the position under the laws written in the 19th century. The Church of Scotland Lord High Commissioner Act 2025 would revoke that legislation and, quote, make provision for persons of the Roman Catholic faith to hold the role. The General Assembly has met almost every year since the Protestant Reformation of 1560. It meets to make laws, set agendas for the Kirk. The Lord High Commissioner acts as a sovereign's representative at the event and delivers the opening and closing speeches. The role is usually held by a prominent member of Scottish society, including King Charles himself in 2000. However, a provision in the Roman Catholic Relief Act of 1829, that's the law that lightened up on Catholics, meant those of the Catholic faith were still barred from the position. The act allowed Catholics in the United Kingdom to retain their faith while serving in Parliament and higher office, but it made an omission for the position of Lord High Commissioner, as well as a few other positions. The new bill proposed by Labour MP Pat McFadden will remove that provision in time for Lady Angelini to take up the job in May. The Cabinet Office described her appointment as a significant gesture of unity, goodwill, and collaboration between the Kirk and the Catholic Church in Scotland. Lady Angiolini, who was born in Glasgow's Govan to a family of Irish Catholic descent, served as Solicitor General under Jack McConnell between 2001 and 2006. She was later Lord Advocate from 2007 to 2011, when she was succeeded by Lord Mulholland. She described accepting the position as Lord High Commissioner as a great honor after being appointed to the role in December. End quote. I don't see that as a bad thing. More freedom for Catholics in the world to do what we should do, which is to use our values to help make society a better place. Even if that just means essentially making non-controversial policy decisions as elected officials and stopping some evil ones from happening. Now, I say that knowing full well that Catholics in government defend some pretty heinous things. Even our vice president defends some pretty heinous things on the life issue. The super duper Catholic, devout Catholic, now stonecutter Joe Biden is the counterexample to everything I just said. I understand that. And Catholics in the United States are pretty bad about this, but as are Catholics in Ireland and Catholics in Scotland and elsewhere who hold positions in government. Our co-religionists in the UK have taken some pretty heinous positions on other things. But that does not mean that it's a bad thing for Catholics to be involved in those government positions. It's a good thing that those barriers are being removed. Joe Blogg says, well, every Scottish migrant to the USA in the 1700s is likely to be Catholic since the Crown and the Protestant clans removed them at a large scale because they had the temerity to resist evil Reformation. Yes. A lot of them are, well, if they're keeping their faith. Remember, if they got here in the 1700s, their Scottish identity is nothing more than a footnote, right? For most of them. They're mostly Americans and they believe all manner of different things. Let's see if these Catholic politicians fight Moloch. Right. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is it's good that Catholics can have these positions, but they better be Catholics about it. Maybe the church is liked among the countries because the church is conforming to world values. That's the other side of this. Synodality demands that we go along to get along. This opening the windows of the church to the world. You know, Cardinal George of Chicago, before he passed away, kind of had a take on Vatican II that basically said that Vatican II led directly to secularization of the church. This opening the windows of the church to the world stuff, trying to dialogue and evangelize the world in a new way that made us more listening and dynamic to the changing world, led to the secularization of the church. And that might be one of the things. David Wilson says, parts of Scotland has deeper anti-Catholicism than Northern Ireland. Not joking, so this is progress. See, that's what I like to see from people in the know. I don't know that much about Scotland. I'm not that surprised. If you look at Scotland's history of the Reformation, that's not that surprising. They went all in, just like the UK did, or England did. But it's not bad news when Catholics have in these places that still have these weird Reformation era laws are allowed to have the freedom that the church expects us to have. Chipone says Catholics like Biden and Pelosi. Hope not. That's kind of the flip side of this. But we'll see. We shall see. So we'll monitor the situation. I do like to report on things that come from the UK sometimes because it's just interesting things happen there. All right, folks. If there's any final thoughts, get them into the comments. I'm very curious what you think about this story today. And because the political landscape is changing, it very much is. You're seeing the U.S.'s role internationally changing, and that has been happening for a long time. But it's now American leadership now has that understanding of things and are seemingly just embracing it, leaning into it. But at the same time, that's going to have a rippling effect everywhere else, including the relationship of the church to the secular authorities. That's going to change as well. It's going to be inevitable. How quickly the church embraces that, we don't know. And those are the kind of things that are going to loom over the next conclave, is the Catholic Charity story and the implications of it, including the role of the church with the secular governments. There have already been some moves behind the scenes for the church to start trying to get funds from other secular governments in Europe to do their work, mostly in Europe. So we shall see. All of these have implications. But let me know what you all think about this in the comments. Yeah, let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly does help. And remember to pray for everybody we spoke about today. We're not here to stir up your ill feelings about any of these public Catholics. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.